looked at trying to break it down into 4 or 5 themes to try and make sure that we did cover something of everything. So just to let you know in advance, we're going to try and say a bit about what was the context of when we set up the line. Then we were going to, that's both the London politics and lesbian politics, etc. And then we wanted to talk about types of callers, which probably you're all interested in, what kind of calls we got. We were then going to talk about how we organised ourselves, a bit about the collective politics, a bit about how we trained each other, and a bit about our filing system and record keeping, which is quite interesting, and anything else that comes up. So we've only got, what, an hour and 3/4, is that right? Yeah. So we could say, we could take questions to go along, but we might have to say stop or we won't get to cover everything. Yeah. Okay. So if you're burning to ask a question, do put your hand up.
We should also say we're doing a workshop at Filia next weekend at the London Feminist Conference. So you're the dry run.
But it will be a bit different because obviously it's everybody's welcome at Filia, so we don't know what kind of audience we'll get.
Yes, but so we've dug it all out for both reasons.
Yeah, but it's quite nice having a run through now. Do you want to say it? But Lynn wasn't there at the beginning, but Lynn was there in the middle.
And the end.
Towards the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to listen to you, and then there are things that came up with me that may or may not come up with you.
We don't know. Yeah.
Some particular calls that were really significant.
And just quickly, put your hands up. How many people here were actually on the line at some time or other? So you may want to add things as well.
Yeah.
Okay. The context.
The context. The line started in 77.
September 77.
And I joined the following summer.
And I was there I was there in the meeting in July before it started.
Yes, so it was set up from there. And I was there for 17 years, apparently. So, some of which was actually being there as a paid worker and all kinds of stuff. So, so I was there till 94. I was there till. You're right, Val. Can't hear. Once the chairs stop squeaking, you should be able to hear. I'll try to remember to project because I've forgotten I haven't got my new hearing aids either yet. So
shall I talk a bit about the very beginning?
Yeah. So before.
There were 3, I think, mixed phone lines. There was Gay Switchboard, London Friend, and Icebreakers. I think that's right.
Yeah, in London.
In London, and there were women, lesbians, working on all of those. They were all gay phone lines, but were very frustrated because they'd be there, with a bloke waiting for the phone to ring, and there were more than one phone in each case. And a woman would ring, but the lesbian who was working there was talking to a bloke, so the woman who rang would have to speak to a bloke, and it was incredibly frustrating. And at the same time also, there was the rise of feminism and all the focus and the beginnings of the women's conferences and all that kind of thing. And so there was very much a focus on doing things for women and supporting women's rights and all the rest of it. What I should also say about that is that at the time, the word lesbian was not out there. It just wasn't. And, you did not walk down the road holding hands, especially if you looked dykey. And it wasn't gay friendly, even for men, but for women we were definitely not visible. So that was another issue about trying to make us more visible, and put women in contact with each other. And so what happened was that Rachel Beck, some of you may know, Shona Brown, a bunch of other people got themselves together and said, come in, have a seat, and said, just put a notice out. The only form of communication at the time was the Earlham Street Women's Liberation Office newsletter, which was done on a Roneo and posted out to people or picked up at centres. And Yeah, so they got those women got together and advertised. So women like me who hadn't been on the phones also joined in, and we decided we would have a benefit. We had the first meeting of the group at the old Camden Women's Centre, which was this amazing Georgian mansion just opposite the Unitarian Chapel on Haverstock Hill. It was a fantastic old building, and it had a ballroom.
And a tennis court.
Yes.
And a swimming pool.
And it was completely ramshackle. And we managed to get permission to have an event there. And we went round we got Jam Today to play. I think they played for free, actually, as a benefit. I can't remember. But anyway.
Probably.
And we went round every single lesbian venue we could think of. Everything from from the gateways, right through. And then I remember standing in the garden of having set it up. This was in August 77, and all of the collective standing there and thinking, will anybody come? And it was amazing because every single type of lesbian you could think of came rolling through the drive. There were bunches of what we used to call bar dykes. They were very, very sort of women who didn't look lesbian at all. I know there isn't a lesbian look, but you know what I mean. The whole range of lesbians came, and there must have been about 100 women there. And we were running around with money in the backs of our pockets. And after the event, when everybody had gone, we sat down and everybody said, how much have you got? We put it all on the table. We thought we've got enough to put the phone in. And it cost about £80 at the time to put the phone in. And so we got the phone installed, and it started in September. I don't remember the exact date in September, but it started in September 77.
So that's 40 years from now. So this was partly what got us thinking about collecting the history. Yeah.
We sat, and what I should say is that we always had the idea that we were a feminist collective and we were not professionals. And as Pam said earlier today, the main thing that we thought we were about was to tell women it was okay to be a lesbian. And the women who had been on the phone calls trained the rest of us. When I say trained, we sat in a circle and said, what would you do if you got this kind of call? And pooled everything people said. So we built up a sort of body of how to deal with calls. So I think I'll probably stop there and let Pam say something about the types of calls we had, maybe.
Okay. We started off. We were there. It was just Mondays from 2 till 10, and Fridays from 2 to 10 was when the phones were staffed, and the rest of the time they were ringing away happily. And I think we had a machine that actually recorded when calls came. It made a note of the times that calls came in, and they just came in 24/7 all the time. People were ringing and getting the answer phone saying, call back on Friday between 2 and 10 or whatever. And then I think very quickly after that we then added Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. So it became two day afternoon shifts and 3 evening shifts to cover. So a total of 25 hours a week we were open. We never aspired to be like Switchboard, open 24 hours a day.
We couldn't. We didn't have enough people.
No, well, Switchboard doesn't have enough people, actually. If you try ringing them at 4 a.m, you probably won't get, I don't know. But and we did record, we made a note of every call. So we had the kind of logbooks, and we basically coded it into about 10 types of calls. So we were then able to keep a rough record of who wanted what from us. And those logbooks are still in, as far as we know, they're in the Glasgow Women's Archive. So they're the most precious documents, they're the most interesting ones. And sometimes you just write, call from Hackney or something, and that was, and sometimes you put bloody pages down because it was so enormous what you just had to talk to. So sometimes those books became like therapeutic dumping spaces, and to be able to just download some of what we listened to. And some of it was easy, as it were. So someone phoning up saying, what time's the Rat and Carrot open tonight? That was fairly easy. Partly our record systems relate to this, because remember, no phones, very few people have personal phones. No mobiles, obviously.
Personal phones at home, landlines.
Yes. We had one phone between 3 flats in the house I was in. No photocopying, no internet, obviously. So everything was about print.
And word of mouth.
Yes, and word of mouth. So our information system, Gay News, which kept, I think it was going more or less throughout the time Lesbian Line was there, always had the back pages which went by town. So you could always look up for anyone calling whether there was any kind of support in their town, because we were national. We weren't London. We ended up being London as lesbian lines rippled out across the country as time went on. We were able then to kind of pass our callers on to something much more local on the whole. But we were very much the a pioneer. In fact, I was trying to scratch my head this morning. I think Manchester actually had a women's phone line before we did. I remember some women there who would come from the same situation, from Manchester Gay Switchboard, set up as a lesbian line. I think it lasted a few months.
Did they call it Lesbian Line? Manchester Lesbian Line?
But yeah, it certainly wasn't gay. That was, yeah, we were using the L word.
Yes.
That was the point. And we chose, I believe there were discussions about what to call it. Should it be the Gay Women's Line, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the Lesbian Line.
And then we had a battle royal with the telephone directory, who wouldn't put us in.
Just like the internet.
So finally, somebody else in the women's movement, it might have been Ernest, I don't remember, managed to persuade them to have a section under W for women. And we got Lesbian Line in under that eventually.
But yes, getting the number out.
They wouldn't actually print the title.
Lesbian.
Yes.
Lesbian.
Yeah.
Well, I think they justified it in terms of they thought it would produce an enormous number of wank calls, you know, which you could see their thinking. Yes, well, it did in a way. Okay, so out of the calls we got, so some of them, as I say, were straightforward information calls, eye for information, you know, and we could look stuff up, and we just had card index, you know. Remember, anyone know what a card index is?
Yes, it's on the wall up there.
Yes. So it was just in there, and it was actually trying to set up the systems. We were kind of, because there's no computers, and we did work with Microsister. Anyone from Microsister? Yes. To set up, so we did get computers in the early 80s, and we set up a very crude, what looks now a very crude database, and actually someone's job, you know, so inputting all that data. So we could get, we were never brilliant at accessing data, basically. It was often you just go back to Gay News or Spare Rib or whatever to try and look anything up. So information calls, relatively easy in London, because this was at a time when there was a lot of actual lesbian stuff, not just gay stuff. So there was probably a lesbian pub night every night.
Somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. So somewhere in London.
They were rotated. So Monday.
Yeah, Mondays was there, Tuesdays was the Soul's Arms, Wednesdays was such and such, the Rat and Carrot was, you know, so, and a few places that were most of the week. But there was always someone somewhere to send someone.
Plus, there were a lot of women's centres operating.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of benefits, disco benefits, and all sorts of things going on.
For lesbians, or
yeah.
for women, for women, actually, not for lesbians, but for women. So
we would say, well, there's going to be, we organised ourselves to have a lesbian line person at specific places, and we'd say, you know, go in and we either have a lesbian line badge on, or, you know, we'd say, if you want to go and you can meet us and we can introduce you to other lesbians who've come to meet us at this event at this time.
Well, the main one of those was the Soul's Arms.
Yeah.
Soul's Arms?
Yes.
Little eyes like it, I think
Top-
which is still there. No, it's now, I was looking for it the other day and it's now a luxury flat.
Yeah.
But it was a pub just
near
by
Warren Street.
by Euston, yeah. And Terry Quay and Diane, I can't remember her surname, but these two women ran a disco there, a women's disco on Tuesday nights. And we used to have a chair by the door, a table by the door, and one of us every Tuesday would be it. And we did call it that. So whoever's job it was to be it would be watching women come through the door and sitting them down and introducing them and so on. So this was a really easier kind of drop-in kind of situation. So there were places to send women in London, and we could usually refer to something somewhere, even if it was the local Che group. We could find somewhere to send women who were available, who were able to travel.
And what we haven't said is...
for homosexual equality.
Sorry, yes. Good old chat. I
and
think they're still
also-
going, aren't they?
And also, what we haven't said is that we ran our own socials, Sunday afternoon tea, basically.
In our own homes,
homes.
which drives therapists actually bonkers, the whole idea. We're just opening up our lives to you women. And
We were
just
quite-
come and we
yeah.
trust you not to be ex-women. They never were. We never had any ex-women. We had some very interesting discussions with some women who came along who needed more than we could offer, which went on well into the night. But there were, on the whole, we never had any serious problems. But yeah, I did them in my home a lot. Someone would have the job of watching out the window, because you'd spot a woman come along the road, walk past, walk back again, go to the corner shop, have several cigarettes. That was when people used to smoke, remember? And then we would go and get them.
Encourage them to come in.
But what was really nice about that was that there were women who didn't want to go to discos.
Yeah.
And it was a sort of low-key tea and cake kind of thing.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of women at those things met each other and said, okay, well, shall we go to the Souls Arms together next week?
Yeah.
Which was quite nice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the other thing was that when I joined, there was, of course, Hilda's, the ballroom dancing venue for women where there were classes and everything, because some women didn't want to go to bars and pubs and so on.
Yeah.
So I would kind of bring it up and say, there's this, and, it's friendly and it's very well. Oh, yeah, actually, because I did some of that when I was younger, or, whatever. I might go to that. And I'd say, well, I might be there, or ask for Wendy. She'll look after you,
Yeah.
and they did. They went. So.
I would suggest they go to the glass bar and ask for Elaine.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So that was a bit later, wasn't
Yeah,
it? It
yeah.
wasn't there at the beginning, but it was really nice, the glass bar.
Yeah.
That was at Euston Station. There's the two square buildings,
Yeah.
and the one on the left, as you're facing the station, was the glass bar, and it was lovely.
Elaine.
Yeah.
So that's information.
Shall we just go back to the callers, because I
Yeah.
just thought, because we had this conversation before everybody arrived. This was the first annual report that we did, and we talk about why we did it later. But in it is we did a log of the number of calls per month. So in September and October, remember that was only operating on 2 days a week,
Yeah.
2 afternoons, 128 calls per month.
Which year
November,
are you talking about? What's the year?
when it started,
77,
77.
78.
Yeah, the data you'll get,
Yeah.
Yeah.
177.
128. In November, so that was a month and a bit after we started, got up to 230. December 219, January mostly 200 until March, when the opening hours increased from 16 to 25 a week and it went up to 432. And then it was an average of 400 every month until we get to August 78, which was after the Thames TV programme that we should talk about in a minute, and that went up to 700. And then after that, it was about 500 a month. So we were busy. Then we got to the point where, you had to have 2 people on, because the minute you put the phone down, it would ring again. And if you'd had a really hard, difficult call, you just couldn't pick it up again and do the next one. So should we run through the types of calls? One of the data here was 65 to 75% of these calls are from women the service was set up to reach. In other words, lesbians or women who thought they might want to be lesbians or whatever. The remaining were business calls from other organisations, journalists, members of the collective on collective business, calls from men, the vast majority of which are abusive or hoaxes, or men who say they're phoning on behalf of or about their wives, girlfriends, sisters, daughters. And another 20% are silent, or the caller puts the phone down immediately it's answered. We got lots of those. And Pam was the expert on getting them to talk.
It became, after 10 minutes, you're not going to get anywhere. So I would give them 10 minutes. But yeah, so I don't know how much things have changed, actually, because I suspect that institutions have changed. They can't be nasty to lesbians anymore, and there is more support out there generally. But I still think that whole process of coming out to oneself is possibly not much more easy now than it ever was, I think, to breach all the rules. So you could imagine, I mean, and I suppose the only qualification we thought we needed on those phones was empathy, was remembering how it was for each of us to come out. You know, like, very few of us just came bursting out at the age of 9 or whatever. So it was that whole thing. I mean, I didn't come out, I was 27, you know, and I had to go through the thing with my family. But that also... so empathy, basically, thinking about why is this woman, it's not just someone really annoying just phoning up to wind you up, basically. We tried not to ever presume that. Sometimes it was people just phoning up just to annoy, you know, just being silent. But there was always, and so you'd go, hello, this is Lesbian Line, we're here, maybe you know, whatever. We're open at these times. If you don't want to talk to me now, you can call back and we go through the menu, and you know, we're here for women in London, outside London. If you're out of London, we can probably tell you, you know, so we just go through what we could. So you just talk for a bit and then say, are you still there? And you get a knock on the phone.
Or you'd say to them, you know, tap the phone if you are still there.
Yeah, once for yes, twice for no. No, I'm not. And I mean, sometimes I would, if you got any kind of feedback at all, it would kind of keep plodding on, because you think, here is this desperate bloody woman hanging on for her life, and I have to keep her there. I have to keep her there.
Yeah.
You know.
I can remember it was either you or Shona. I remember being the second person and listening to you talking, and suddenly saying, oh, let's talk about something else. What kind of ice cream do you like?
Yeah.
And it got a chuckle. And, you know, then once you got them to sort of react, and there were other things, I can't remember all of them, but people did have a range of things to try and make people laugh or react, and then things would start to roll. And sometimes people would ring back. You'd get a call and they say, I've rung 3 times, but I couldn't say anything, but I want to talk to you now. So there was quite a lot of that. And sometimes, I mean, there were times when came off the phone in tears, when the really difficult things. But anyway.
Yeah, there were some we couldn't help, and those obviously the most difficult of all. So yeah, silent calls about 20%. Yeah. But I would, as I say, at the end of whatever, when you run out of things to burble on about, I would say, look, there's probably other callers waiting to call. You're probably better off you're probably going to find it too difficult to start talking now. So
ring us back. So
you hang up. I wouldn't hang up on them. You hang up and call us back either tonight or another time, and all the rest of it. So because it was, I mean, I did once, because I was getting enough feedback, I did track down one woman without a word from her to find out that she was living in Bournemouth, had 4 children, and drove a blue car, and, you know, all this by yes, no, 6. But it was, because I was going, which motorway are you off? So it was like M1, M2, M3, M4. So M4 took me westwards and then coming up, you know. But
she was an ace at this.
Yeah, I know my motorways. But yeah, so we would, yeah. But those were a good chunk, and we had to handle them properly, because you had to presume it was someone that needed us always.
And then there were some other kinds of calls that were worth talking about.
Young women.
Yeah, young.
Schoolgirls.
Okay, let's look at young women.
Yeah.
Yes.
Schoolgirls. They were among the ones that were very difficult. The ones where you come out thinking, what can I offer you? Because
you can't invite them to a dinner.
There is no comparison with the situation today, where if they would be immediately put on the conveyor belt, which is another story we're trying to avoid talking about today. But yeah, young women, sometimes I think if they were still at school, we would not advise them to come out to all their friends. You know, we would desperately try to get them to find other lesbians to talk to. And there were things like the Metro place down in Greenwich Way, and there were a few things for young people out there. The trouble was, most of them were not allowed to have people under 16, so they had to lie to be able to go and access these young people's services and so on. But so yes, trying very much to get them onto things for young women. But sometimes we had, it crosses over a bit. We had lots of regular callers, where they would keep calling back and trying to get through, because could be very hard to get through. But where we were their only lesbian contact at all, ever. And so they would call up, and you'd end up talking about what's going on Coronation Street or whatever, because that was just their lesbian lives, was this half an hour every 3 or 4 weeks of chatting to us, which was kind of enough to keep them going through whatever their current situation was. So they would come back, you know, so there were a few, and some of them would end up, they'd be able to come to our socials or whatever, so it would move on. But sometimes, you know, especially the most difficult thing, so young women was tricky because there wasn't anything really we could offer them, especially if they were under 16. They couldn't go to bars. And if they didn't live in London, there wasn't necessarily very much available. There were books, actually, and probably they're also in my boxes that I will open one day. So the books of, you know, recommending them where they could get things to read, because at that time also there was a radical bookshop in every town in the country. You know, in the days when before the netbook agreement, which wiped out a lot of, so there was a lot of independent bookshops, which again were a brilliant resource. And partly I worked in one. So
The Joy of Lesbian Sex was out then, wasn't it?
No, that was later.
Was
that was
later?
in the 80s, but it wasn't very
There
good.
were, okay.
It wasn't very helpful because it kind of kept doing dots. There was lots of ellipses in the didn't really tell you how to get stuck in particularly well. But yeah, so young women were tricky. Married women,
Yes, lots of those.
where the first thing we would say would be, don't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
Do not tell your husband.
And this is the point where you should talk about the Samaritans.
Yes.
You remind me.
Even though he's ever so nice and you love him and you've been with him for 37 years, don't tell him yet. Lynn?
I remember the Samaritans wanted to meet with us to discuss the way they would handle any lesbian calls.
Yeah.
It'll be in the 90s because I was there, and we were absolutely flabbergasted to hear that they had told the people working on their switchboard that when these women rang in and said that they were lesbian and they wanted to, the Samaritans would say, have a chat with your husband and whatever. And we used to say, no, it's the last one because he might be the nicest man on the planet, as so many of us knew. But as soon as you told him that you no longer desired him, he was liable to punch you, throw you on the street, try to get custody of the kids.
Get the children.
Yes. The worst thing we can do, the Samaritans went, oh my God, we've been doing it for a while. So we said, no, get them to ring us, get them to whatever, but don't, husband, nothing like that, in fact, you know. So, yes, in that respect.
So that gives you a feel for where lesbians were in the world at large, even in the 90s, if the Samaritans were prepared to do that. And I found the other thing about married women was I got quite a lot, don't know why I got them, but I got quite a lot of calls from married women who had a lesbian relationship, but it had broken down.
Yeah.
And they were desperate. I had women on the phone in tears because they couldn't express their upset anywhere. They had to have a mask on with the husband, with the family, with the blah, 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 with the kids. And their relationship with their best mate or whoever it was, or their neighbour or something, had fallen apart. And that was very hard. And all you could do was make noises and keep them talking and listen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And say, I really feel for you. It's okay to be a lesbian. It was okay what you did. You don't have to feel bad about it. I know you have to parcel it up. Would you like to come to one of our socials or meet with one of us? You know, sometimes I'd offer that, not always, but it was very hard. Those were some of the ones where I came off the phone in tears occasionally because of just feeling what they felt like and how difficult it was for them, especially if they had kids. So they didn't have the walk out option that the ones who didn't have kids had, especially because the other thing going on at this time that Pam's alluded to was, and I can't remember when it stopped, but the whole lesbian custody battles. Lots and lots and lots of women lost their kids.
Including me.
Right.
I lost my children.
But the lesbian custody cases started about 1975.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
They were already
There
happening.
was, presumably you were referring women to
There was the
lesbian parents.
There was the
group.
lesbian custody group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite active.
Yeah.
And we did
Yeah.
have groups like that we could
Yeah.
refer people to, but it
Yeah.
was still hard. And we would say to women who'd rung, whose relations broken, and said, look, before you do anything or speak to anybody, talk to the lesbian custody group. They will tell you, warts and all, what could happen.
Yeah. But before that, there was Action for Lesbian Parents, which was also campaigning for self-insemination, well, artificial insemination for lesbians and all that.
Yeah, well, that was a different thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Linda, do you want to say more?
It's quite painful, and because I didn't contact Lesbian Line, not because I had any doubt about being a lesbian, but because as a black woman, I didn't know that it was a safe space for me. In fact, it would have been, but I didn't know that. So I felt I was very, very isolated. I mean, the great thing is now I've got wonderful grandchildren, and they all know I'm a dyke, etc. You know, so it's like my children, my grandchildren are absolutely fabulous. But at the time of my coming out, really, really profound for every lesbian, whoever, you know, whatever's going on, it isn't often easy just to come out. But when you've got children, it is particularly difficult. But later, when I had come out, it was fine, if you know what I mean. It was fine. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy being a lesbian mother. There you go.
Yeah, and there are all the issues like that about, you know, your kids going to school and you as the parent, and, you know, what do you say to the school and blah, 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 blah. All
Well,
that.
my kids were, I tell you, the very positive thing was my kids got quite a lot of kudos about their mother being a lesbian.
Yeah.
So it wasn't negative for them, but it might have been for other children. So I wouldn't want to generalise, but it doesn't always have to be. It doesn't always have to be negative.
Yeah.
I think only in Brighton, eh? Yes, you could be right. Only in Brighton.
Yes.
But what you said earlier about not being sure about whether Lesbian Line was going to be a friendly environment for me, I think that's, Pam and I were talking about that, because we were basically a white collective, probably because that's the way the women's movement was at the time, and there were more divisions between black and white women's groups and all that kind of thing.
Still.
But yes, we were. I think we had one Asian woman who was on the collective for a short while in the early years when I was there.
Oh, there were more. There were other women came, you know. But, I mean, the thing was, there was turnover of everybody.
Yeah.
It was fucking exhausting,
Yeah.
you know. So anyone lasting more than 6 months, you know, it was sad.
No, the people lasted more than 6 months.
No, but on the whole, you know, it
2
was
or 3 years.
It was a
most
big,
people.
because it wasn't just about the phones. The whole point was there was all the other stuff that needed to be done. It's probably the same with just about every organisation there. You come in and there's this thing you want to do and you're doing it, and here's your 3-hour slot and that's what you want to do. But actually having that phone there with that being available for 3 hours has required a whole team of other women
to set up a
phone
rota,
there, yes, doing
ring round and fill the rota when it's empty.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I was just looking. We had teams. You see, this
Get extra phones, because I seem to recall
Two
there
Early
phones.
on,
Two
early
phones,
on,
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
This is some of the lists. This is brilliant because I've just found these. I've just found this fat folder. So this is some of the address lists of the. So this is some of the lists of women who have been on Lesbian Line at various times. Okay, so that's just the ones on the top of my pile. But we can Google them these days.
I have Googled a few of the first
Yes.
collective and found
But,
them. Yeah.
So, and we had teams. So here we have admin team starts here. So that's that many. Publicity team starts here.
That was really important.
Yeah, training team. So we're bringing new women in and doing the very nominal training that we did and so on. The workers support team. Oh, this was in the glory days when we had funding.
Yeah.
So we had anything, well, I'll come on to that. But yeah, so we did divvy up the work. And the idea was no one just came in and did the phones. So this, of course, cost us because women who did just want to do the phones would not want to get involved in having to come to every second Monday night. They would have to come to the collective meeting.
But
So it wasn't just doing a phone, you had to be there at the fucking collective
But that
meeting.
was really important
Yeah.
because it was at the collective meetings that we raised, does anybody want to raise any difficult calls that have come in this
Yeah.
week? And it was terribly important
Yeah.
because that was the way we shared. And also because
Yes.
individuals who phoned might phone again And we'd have to say to the collective, there is this person who gave her name as this, we never knew it was a real name, or gave her name as first name, you know. This basic bones of it may call back, be aware, because they were not guaranteed to get the same woman.
Yeah.
So there was a lot. But also what I should say is that I personally, and I think other people did too, I used to go home after having done a night or an afternoon on the phones and feel I've done something.
Yeah.
You know, a real feeling of, you know, however hard it was or frustrating, that we had given something, we'd done something, and that was the most rewarding thing for me about the line, really.
It was the idea that you could change someone's life in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was, I mean, we were all doing a load of other, you know, there's masses of other things going on, and women's centres to run and bookshops to go. But Lesbian Line was the only thing I think I probably ever, well, maybe a bit of my teaching work, possibly. I might have changed a few lives there, but that you could, in that bit of time, a very, very direct contact with one woman turning her life around, just by saying to her, it's perfectly all right to be lesbian. You are completely normal. You can be happy. There will be a future for you.
Did you get a lot of shame and guilt and stuff? Because
Yeah.
back then it was like, that was the heavy shit, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
like, fuck.
Or I'm frightened what will happen if I tell my mother, my friends, my
Yeah.
brother. Lynn wants to talk about one call.
One call, and I came off and Pam said, shall we sit for a while? And you went and made a cup of tea. It was after the first Iraq war, and I got a call from a woman. And I think sometimes it was quite fortuitous, because I've travelled a lot in the Middle East and I know a lot about it. So I was very interested in this call, and so we could talk. And she was an army nurse, senior nurse, and she'd been in the 1991, I'm trying to think of the year, invasion, and they went in from Kuwait. She wasn't out to anyone, she was a lesbian, but certainly in the army you couldn't be out. And she was a nursing sister, but she wanted to talk. It came out slowly. She wanted to talk because, as we probably, a number of us have heard, when they went into Iraq, what they did on the retreating Iraqi soldiers, and America denied they did it, was just bomb the whole lot.
Turkey shoot.
Yeah. And she had seen this and she knew about it, and she was carrying this and she wanted to talk to somebody. And of course, being a lesbian, she wanted to talk to someone maybe who was a lesbian, because she couldn't talk about it in the army. They'd been told to shut up. So I remember being on the phone for ages, listening, talking, and I was asking questions, which I suppose helped her because I was interested in what she was saying. I wanted to know. So we talked for a long time, and she said, I don't know what else I can say really, but it was so good talking to you, because I have no one else to share this with, this terrible thing. So I'm quite moved now. So I came off the phone and I was moved. Then I was on with you and you said...
Completely gone, nothing in there.
You said, shall we have a little while where we don't answer the phone and I'll go and make you a
Put
cup
them
of
off the
tea?
hook, yeah.
Yeah. And this woman, and I thought, how horrendous, lesbians going through so much, and the only place that they can ring was Lesbian Line in London, and I'm not sure where she was ringing from. She might have told me.
Of course, what's daft about that is that, of course, the army is stuffed full of lesbians.
Yeah.
Yes,
You know, all of whom were in the closet.
You'd be thrown
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Well, all the uniformed services. I mean, it always has been. You know, ambulance, army, whatever.
But she'd seen a massacre, and
Yes.
she'd been overwhelmed, and they were
And
told
they had
to keep
no,
quiet.
they had no support system to. They must have. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, where were we? Mothers, young ones.
Should we just talk about where
we were.
So we were in Camden Women's Centre for
Couple of years.
and then that closed, and the Camden Council was going to redevelop it into fancy flats. Or something, you know, an old people's home, wasn't it? Anyway.
So we nicked all the fixtures. There was this beauty. I still have it.
Yeah, I went with Pam. This is not to be recorded.
It's
In
too
the middle
late.
of the night, Pam said to me, I need to go and get something. Will you come and help me?
It was
And
this
it was this beautiful rose-coloured 1930s Art Deco mirror.
peach glass mirror
Beautiful.
that we got off the wall, and I got it home.
It was massive. I don't
Yes,
know
still-
how we did it without
still have
breaking it.
And the fireplaces, wonderful marble. We couldn't
They
get as
only
far as the
smashed them up
fireplace.
anyway.
I know, it would have done.
Yes.
It's in her flat.
Contractors go in
Yeah.
and they smash them up.
Yeah.
So
It's
you
beautiful.
liberated it.
No, I think they knew about the marble fireplaces. But anyway,
Yeah, no, we didn't.
So we moved from there to Gray's Inn Road.
Gray's Inn Road,
Yes.
where, you know, the pointy, you know, where there's the
Where
little
the-
tower up
yes,
above
yes.
and the point. And down the right hand side of that, there was a jazz record shop
Mole
called
Jazz.
Mole
Yeah.
Jazz. And up above that, there was Lesbian Line, Rights of Women, National Abortion Campaign, Housing Action. and something
There were
else.
5
Oh,
women's
wow.
organisations.
Women
Yeah.
and manual trade.
Women's
Yes.
Manual
Yeah.
Trade.
Yes,
Well,
yeah.
I drove past it today and looked up and it's gone. It's gone. That bit of it is
Yes.
gone. Some of the rest of the
It's luxury
big-
flats.
That should have a plaque on
Yes,
it.
it
Yes.
absolutely
We want a
should.
pink plaque there. Yes.
Lavender.
Custody. Yeah, Lesbian custody was there. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Started in that building.
Yeah.
And it was horrendous because they're narrow. I remember one day we said, let's just explore in case we had to get out for a fire. And the only way out was up onto the roof and wandering along the roofs. It was horrendous.
Yeah, I'd be there at 10 o'clock on a Friday night in this empty building, up a narrow wooden staircase on the 4th floor, where the only exit was through this padlocked fire escape. And it didn't go anywhere, it just went onto the roof of the next building, so you had to hope the next building wasn't on fire too. But it did used to leave me slightly, because we had a letterbox, you know, and we went with people, we were secret, we didn't publish the address, we had a box number. But there were ways people could find out where we were, so I was always very aware of petrol going through that letterbox. But
And National Women's Aid was there as well.
yes, Women's Aid, all the things that men hate. Yes, it was just.
People used to visit, you
Yes.
know, and it'd be like a whole building full of lesbians.
Yes.
Which was actually great because, you know, we all talked to each other, it was quite social, you know, we knew everybody, and also we knew if we needed help, like, you know, we could say to a caller, listen, you know, you can either ring back or you give me your number, and we'd nip down to Rights and Women and say, what do we do about this?
Yeah.
And it was very useful. Okay, and then after that,
So it was. I don't know how we found ourselves in this. You know, we chose to ally ourselves with those women's organisations. So actually, physically to move it, I can't remember who invented that setup. Who found?
it was
would have been shown her.
Rachel was working for Homeless Action, and she
Yeah.
knew there was a space at the top.
Yeah. And so we rented the building. So it involved money partly moving. Camden Women's Centre was effectively free, and so we were then jointly with all these women's organisations renting that office space. So yes, we chose very much to place ourselves in that space rather than going off with some of the gay men's organisation or mixed organisations. And then we were there for a long time, and then
GLC came along.
and then, yeah,
got funding.
serious
for-
money.
And we
And
moved.
I was the grants officer.
And then sometime after that, we moved to Featherstone
Street, which is
Which
still
was,
there.
I think that was that after the whether
No,
was
that
that,
was the GLC.
that, but that was
GLC.
one of the GLC's bequests,
Yes.
wasn't
Yeah.
it? That when the GLC was going, they said you can have this
just
building.
before the GLC ended,
In
it
86.
was
Yes.
we got a contract
Because
so
it
we could
gave-
give it to you.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
there was that. There was the bookshop in Charing Cross Road, Silver Moon, wasn't there? And there's something else.
I can't
GLC
remember
gave
Silver Moon.
those. Yeah, they
I
would.
didn't do that one, but I did the Featherstone.
And there was
Yeah.
Wild Court as well that
Yes,
was given,
yes,
and there was
yes,
something
yeah, that
else.
was it. That was the women. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows
Yeah,
what happened
but
there?
the bookshop
Later.
in Charing Cross Road got their lease as a
Ah,
result of
I
it as
don't
well.
know.
And then blew it. But
Yeah.
I
anyway.
think the point in saying all this though is that there was lots of women's and lesbians organisations around at the time, and now there's virtually nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
But the other thing is that there began to be, as Linda's case, a lot of strategically placed lesbians in
Yeah.
local councils
Yeah,
and the
that's
GLC
absolutely.
who could make things
things
work.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Then we went to Haringey. I mean, there was all kinds of things in which there were members of our community
Yeah.
who were doing
Yeah.
things and could communicate with each
Yeah.
other.
And also learning all those bourgeois skills to be able to bring forward into our lives now as well. You know, that was the thing. The GLC effectively trained up an awful number of women to
But
actually.
even before that, like I worked for Pensioners Link, and that was full of lesbians. And you just kept employing more and more. There were 12
grant aided through every borough, and they just all had
But that
lots
was
of
the sort of debate within the women's movement in the sort of mid-70s, you know, was like lesbians were underground, but actually we were in the women's movement, and there was this whole thing with straight women not, you know, straight women apparently running it, but actually lesbians running it.
making the bigger
And
contribution.
I remember I went to the International Tribunal for Crimes Against Women in Brussels in 1976. I remember a whole gang of lesbians going up on the stage and saying, we want one of the demands, you know, to be about lesbians, because we weren't there, we weren't visible in what was being talked about. So there was this sort of explosion between sort of, you know, 76 and 80 of putting lesbians on the map, really. There was one thing we haven't talked about that I thought was worth talking about, which was at the first annual report. I remember I sat in the collective and said, I think we ought to write an annual report. And I remember people looking at me thinking, who is this bourgeois? You know, and I said, no, we need to actually make ourselves known to the outside world. And this was about 18 months in from when we started, I think. And
This is letraset.
Yes.
I can't remember the exact font. I've probably still got the sheet with these letters missing in that same box. But yes, where you got a sheet of letters and you rubbed off each letter, stuck it down to make things look.
and then you
good.
Ronio'd it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then this I think was actually, this would have been Romeo.
Yeah.
But yes.
But anyway, so we did. I mean, I just agreed to pull it all together, but we did put a lot of work into it between us.
Excellent.
And we had a copy of our first press release, all sorts of, most of the stuff we talked to you about, the kinds of calls, premises, blah, blah, lesbians in the news. But we should talk about the speaks we did, but also talk about the other things, sorry, I've lost my words, but I'll get. What happened was that we began to say, we sent the first report out to all the social services in London, because we thought they at least should know about us. And we also, I can't remember how, but anyway, we started to do speaking engagements to go and talk to organisations that didn't know anything about lesbians and wanted to hear. And it was a start they wanted to hear. So I can remember one we did, which was the Hertford Housewives Register. And Housewives Register was the alternative to the WI for sort of thinking women, so to speak, at the time. I think WI's moved on a lot, but at the time it was very much flower arranging and jam. And this was the sort of thinking women's group. And it was really interesting. And we used to go in and say, how many of you know any lesbians? And they'd all say, no, you're the first one to see her. We didn't think you'd look like this. You look just like us. You know, I think they thought we'd be freaks. And you know, so we'd talk about what we did and all the issues, the kinds of things we've talked about here. And by, you know, halfway through, they'd be saying, oh, there was that woman I used to work with. And, oh, my mother had a friend who never married. And all these, you know, we'd say, but you said you didn't know any lesbians. And then we'd go into, and would you know we were lesbian when we were walking down the street? I mean, those of us who were not, you know.
We left the brill cream at home.
Yes. and what was funny about this one was, at one point this woman said, we'll have coffee now. And she knocked on the door. And the door opened, and in came the husband with a pinion and a trolley with all these magnificent cakes and coffee. There you are, girls, he said, and disappeared. So, but I mean, I thought it was great, because I thought these are straight women, or I assumed they were straight women, you know, who wanted to find out about us, and that was okay.
We were one of the few visible lesbian organisations. So obviously we got called up for things that were nothing to do with help, advice and information on the phone. So there was quite a lot of requests for speaks and so on, and then we would try and, because there were, to start with, I don't think there were any other kind of lesbian groups listed as such.
There was Lesbian Left.
Yeah, you know, there was the lesbian custody groups and so on, but they weren't public. They weren't out there, because our job, part of what we were trying to do was get out there. So I should, at this point, I will wave our stickers around. Okay, this was how we publicised ourselves. That was the funded version. So this was
colour. We got the money for colour.
so we would stick these wherever we could.
Just like the
So-
Philia things at the moment.
Yes,
You know when they had we had buses and all the seats were facing forward?
Yes.
Yes.
We used to stick at the back of the seats.
So
And then there came a point when we realised that actually we were getting a lot of mail calls. Some were just okay, curious, and some were abusive. So then we decided we would only stick at women's toilets and women's places.
some of us would just stick her anywhere. This was a lovely. This was Joe Nesbitt. Do you know
Maybe,
Joe Nesbitt's
yeah.
work? So a lot of this is all what we could now call pro bono. So women would just do stuff for us for free. So those were done by Sue Beasley for us, who was actually on the line. This was Joe Nesbitt's. So I would just wave this. This is a woman, a very, very one of Joe Nesbitt's wonderful 50-year-old housewives with curlers in, peeping round a curtain saying lesbians are everywhere, which was just that was our message actually more than anything, was that do not presume, you will be all right being a lesbian, do not presume everyone is heterosexual, which of course was a standard response to
There were badges, weren't there, saying "How dare you presume?"
I'm
Yeah,
heterosexual,
right,
yes,
yes,
exactly.
yeah.
So it was trying to just get that idea across that we were all over the place.
Some of the things we also got involved in was, like there was the TV programme, Gays Speaking Up, and who was the guy that was comparing that? I can't remember, but anyway, that was an invitation to all the gay groups in London. I think it might have gone to Gay Switchboard first, but they had actually got in touch with a whole lot of, and there was about 80 to 100 of us when turned up. For the
All
programme.
stacked up in the studio.
Yeah, but we discovered before they started, because it was going to be pre-recorded, it wasn't live, so they could cut out anything bad we said. But anyway, we discovered they were not going to put our phone lines out at the end of the programme. So the word went round, everybody just said, right, we're not doing the programme then. And they said, but we've got it all set up and you're all here. Well, sorry. So they did, in fact, put out. But also what had happened, I don't know, did I bring that picture with me? I know it's in here. We had T-shirts made. I should have brought my T-shirt.
That's right, yeah.
Lesbian Line in glittering letters. And there's a picture in here made from the Hampton. Okay, you can see it later. And we wore those, but unfortunately the number was on the back, so it wasn't much good for the programme. It was a mistake we made. But we did go into the programme wearing Lesbian Line T-shirts. God knows if that
And then we ran back. This was when it was still in Camden, because I think I joined by then, and ran back at the end of the programme, and the phone just rang and rang and rang. And all we could do then was to say, we're dead busy, can you call us back another time? But and there was literally like 500 calls in the space of that evening because of getting the number out,
Yeah.
And because we were, being point of contact meant we got invited onto all sorts, or got asked to respond to all sorts of stuff. So that was all part of the work we were doing, was writing stuff and
And then
Promoting, I think is the word.
yes.
Do you remember how she
Sorry,
later
was it?
promoting?
Promoting,
You're
yes.
promoting.
Yes, we promoted lesbians.
A law to
Yes.
stop us promoting.
Absolutely, Section 28.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were allegedly promoting.
Yes.
And the other thing that's worth mentioning is, do you remember Maureen Colquhoun?
Yes.
Maureen Colquhoun was a Labour MP for Northampton North,
And now,
and she wasn't out.
she was outhead.
She was outhead,
Yeah.
yes. And then what happened was her local constituency she was a good local MP, and they didn't reselect her for the election. And there was a huge campaign on the basis that she had been deselected because she was a lesbian.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that is I remember walking down Shaftesbury Avenue, I think it was, when they used to have these news sellers going, late standard, and you'd have that thing on the floor with the word lesbian. I remember saying, look, the word is there. So and
lesbian MP in constituency row. Or
But the word lesbian was there.
yes,
not gay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and she had a whole bunch of us who were on her support group to tea in the House of Commons, and that was great fun. All the MPs were around, and we were sort of sitting there with badges on. But that was important in terms of it, again, hitting the national headlines in the national public with a word that they wouldn't even talk about. And the other thing we
Just
haven't
like now
said,
then.
Yeah.
Just like now.
but the other thing that I think is worth saying is that there were people who rang up who, after they'd talked to us for a while, and they'd say, well, are you a lesbian? And we'd say, well, yes, all of us are lesbians here. Oh, I thought it was a service for lesbians. So there was, no, but
Put
you
up by
understand.
social services or something.
yeah.
Yes, like some.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Yes.
there were quite a few people who didn't realise that actually what we, because women who were not in the women's movement probably didn't have an idea of the collective doing it for ourselves, sort of thing. And we definitely took the line that we didn't want to be professionals. In fact, there was one therapist who wanted to join the collective, and she did go through the training, and I think in the end a group of us decided, I don't know, it was probably to do with her as well, but we decided we didn't want somebody who was professional answering the phones, really, unless they really agreed to our lines, sort of thing.
I was wondering, have you ever heard of a group called the Fallen Angels, round about 1984?
There was a
Name
pub.
rings
There was a
bell.
pub, the Fallen Up in Angel.
Apparently there was a group which purported to be fighting for lesbian rights, but were made up of women that weren't lesbians. And they were associated with going to conferences in Barcelona and promoting a zero age of consent.
Oh, yes, I know.
Yes,
You remind me.
I mean,
Bow's
I'm asking if
speeches.
you heard of it because the ex-mayor of Islington Council has now been hauled up on charges of being a member of that group, People for Support group, and is now being questions are being asked by the survivors of abuse in those children's homes. What happened to their dossiers? And I just wondered if, because I've never heard of it.
Yeah, there was a group, and I went to a meeting or something or other, and they were saying that children should be able to decide when they wanted to have sex and blah, 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 and I made a great fuss, and I got chucked out.
I had the same. Peter Tatchell and I argued publicly and in groups back in the 80s about he said that there should be no age of consent,
he
and I
was
wanted to kill him.
terrible.
But that was the pie.
Yes, exactly.
Paedophile information exchange, which was mainly men, all men. I think.
They were all
They were all men.
Yeah, but
and
there were
came
women who actually supported them, which I just could not understand.
They came to the NU. I was as a mature student. I was in the NUS Lesbian and Gay, or Gay and Lesbian, whatever it was, and Pi came. When I realised I hadn't heard of them before, and then I realised what they were, and I think I physically threw them out. I was so, and I had very small children at that time,
Yes.
and the idea that these men could argue, give a political argument. No,
It was all
a political argument that somehow what they were doing should be supported, and it was political.
And
I
they
just
were
wanted
at
to
the
kill
front
them.
of the Gay Pride March, one of the marches. I remember there was a big hoo-ha about that as
Yeah.
well.
Can we come back to, have you got more to say?
Yeah,
Yes,
just,
the S&M
I
issue
think you
as
should
well.
talk about Kirsten, and you've got something else.
The S&M issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as
right.
Linda's alluded, we were a very white organisation, although we did have black women did join us, and I think at one point some black women started up a black lesbian line. We wondered whether we should have one night a week set aside or something. That didn't work, so there was an
I
attack.
don't recall
I can't. I've got. It's
I mean,
in my
I
brain
know it's
somewhere
involved
that did
some of that
happen.
lesbian politics
Yes.
of those days.
Yeah.
We had something at, we met at, we had a conference, but that was a bit later, about 84. But we met at Black Women's Centre.
Yes, in
Brixton.
Camden.
Yeah.
And,
Oh,
no,
Brixton.
Brixton,
Brixton, yeah.
Black Women's Centre.
Yes.
And we had a lesbian group, a black lesbian group.
Yes.
I think we met on a Sunday. But I don't remember ever suggesting there be alternatives to white lesbian stuff. I think we would just do it.
There
we were doing
was.
CR, but we
There
were
was.
actively-
It was kind of sometime in the 80s, I think, but it obviously didn't last long. The other thing was we were after we moved from Gray's Inn Road, after we moved to Featherstone Street, because Gray's Inn Road was completely inaccessible to anyone in a wheelchair or with mobility difficulties and people who were a bit worried about fire. So we did do more outreach to try and get women with disabilities to join us. And at one point we got, there were two deaf women. One was called Anna, Dubbelt,
Yes,
I think,
yes,
if I remember
yes.
correctly. And another one, whose name is gone. And we got a minicom, which was like before texting. So it was a text-based phone. So again, you'd have, so we set this up and we would list, that was on a separate number. And so deaf women or women with hearing loss could actually call and talk online, well, effectively online, it would be early online.
Down
I
the
suppose.
phone line.
Yes. So we'll be able to type to Anna. So this was early days, pre-internet, of ways to actually communicate without speech on the phone,
And I think
which was,
Kirsten Hearn
Yeah,
also
she
did
was-
a lot of, as
she
a
was
blind
in-
lesbian,
yes,
then and now, still ensuring, or seeking to ensure that
yes,
blind women, partially sighted women, could play a lesbian, not
Yeah.
just women, I mean lesbians.
yes. Well, Kirsten joined Lesbian Line.
Yeah.
And so we then, me included, then had to got all our card index cards and
Braille.
typed up. So with her Perkins braille, actually made braille cards. So we have somewhere, possibly in some archive somewhere, there's a complete set of braille cards of all our basic information, so that Kirsten could actually take the calls. I think she was the only blind woman that ever joined. But so that was great. And also having someone who's very, very actively doing disability awareness politics changes the group anyway.
Yeah.
So it was like, and that we would not put on any events in an inaccessible venue and so on. And so every event you would have a whole list of information, not just about whether it was up or downstairs, but how far it was from the tube, how big the lift was, what the lighting was like, whether there was food, all the actual essential information, which is much more than just for wheelchairs. So I think that trained me, and then you cascade that training outwards. So we were all having to take on much more than having to learn about much more than just how to answer the phones and stuff.
Yes, one thing that came towards the end of my time in the 90s was the S&M issue. And I remember we did get someone on the collective who was very strong and I used to overrule if I was on with her. I used to try and avoid being on with her, that S&M callers, that we should be completely positive about this issue. I didn't feel that I could be positive about the issue, especially in view of some of the things that were going on.
Yeah.
And I was very worried about this. So the only way I know that there were problems, and I'm hazy about the dynamics of what was happening. I think people felt uneasy, but at that time it was very hard. It's almost like the trans issue now.
Yeah.
That if you weren't espousing it and being sympathetic and going along with it, there was something wrong with you and your politics. You're intolerant or something else like that. Also, the other thing that came up and struck me a couple of times was we had some trans men or men that appeared to be trans of some kind and wanted, because they claimed that they were women, wanted to talk. And I was very uneasy about this because I thought in myself, I'm here to speak to lesbians who are women, not to men who think that they're lesbians, because they fancy women have a sex change. And so sometimes, and then you became aware sometimes when they're dragging on and that they're masturbating or something, or they say what they're wearing, and so I just put the phone down. You weren't supposed to put the phone down, but phone down.
Oh, we could. They were hoax. They would just get classified as hoax, really.
Yeah.
So we get men phoning up pretending to be women, which was difficult because not every woman has a nice soprano voice. So you get someone and they'd be phoning up and chatting away, and you'd be thinking, hang on a minute. And we couldn't say, I think you're a man, in case it was a woman that just sounded like they had a deep voice, because how absolutely life-destroying that would be if they phoned up this lesbian resource and been told you're a bloke. So we would just... they could never keep it going long, though. They'd always end up, it would just, they couldn't keep the pretence up. On the whole, they would reveal themselves to be who they were. But it was dead annoying because And you'd have to say things like, sometimes we even get men phoning up pretend to be women, and how pathetic that is, and then they kind of go away. But it was annoying. There was a substantial number of these, but yeah.
There were blokes who rang up who were genuine. My daughter thinks she might be a lesbian.
Get her
Can
to
you
call.
tell me?
Yeah.
Yes, well, that would be our line. You talk for a little bit, well, that's okay, and that's why we're here, and
Get the
blah, blah,
doctor
blah.
to
And
ring.
how did you find our number? How did you find our number?
Yeah.
And, and then, get your daughter to ring. It's perfectly okay. This is who we are. sort of
We'd
thing.
never hang up on anyone without good reason.
Yeah.
Basically, that was a kind of rule. I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah,
we
and
didn't ever.
occasionally you had gay men, or I'd get them, who'd been trying for hours to get through to one of the gay switchboards, and they were
Yes.
desperate for some
Support.
reason, someone to
Yeah.
talk to, and so you didn't feel you can say, sod off, this is for lesbians. You might listen and try and help and say, ring it so-and-so, can you ring really early in the morning, or can you ring it, because then you'll get them, the phone is really here for lesbians, but you might give them advice. Sometimes you could just say, right, well, we've actually got that info, we can tell you that there's a men's thing at so-and-so, and give them the info and get them off the line.
And sometimes the phone number for GLAD was given as the Lesbian Line London for a little while when I was on the line. So
Phone number for what?
from
Glad being
gay and lesbian.
legal advice.
Yes.
Yes.
Gay legal advice,
Something.
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Directory.
And so
Directory.
I do remember a man ringing up because his very ill partner had been, he'd been able to be advocate for him while he was in hospital before. The guy's family arrived from New Zealand and whisked him away, and he was then seeking advice, but, in the end, like I say, it's the wrong number, But, so we did get calls from him because of that. And we used to get hoax calls from women which you could track through the book, because all the calls were written up, that a woman who once claimed that she'd slept with a man because she was in love with her best friend, and the best friend also slept with the same man. And then later, she rang up because she could recognise the voice, and claimed that she had slept with her grandmother, and you could follow these calls through, get to recognise the voice, and I don't know what the motivation from that ever was by someone. And then when you start questioning them, probably you would then get the call finished.
We'd also get two young women ringing up and tittering.
Yeah.
And it's okay. We just used to play them along and talk to them, and in the end they were usually quite nice. They'd rung up for a laugh. Let's ring that lesbian line. But then we also did get a lot of male abuse calls, and for that we had a whistle.
Hey! You mean you blow it down the...
Blow it down the phone. After we'd had an earful of abuse,
Yeah,
we'd give it time to see if it
You
was a
dirty
real
lesbian.
one.
There was a bit of that. Not a lot, because they couldn't hang on long enough to get through the engaged tone. That was the
Or
thing.
they'd ring up and say, "What do you do in bed? I could do this with you," and
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Nothing new there.
Have you mentioned the women who, on the level, would ring up for advice on how to do it?
Yeah, we
Yes.
haven't talked about that.
I haven't
That's true.
talked about
Always
My
tricky.
girlfriend
But
and
yes,
I
they do.
don't know what to do. Can you tell us what to do?
Yeah.
And I remember a big collective discussion about this because we were all a little bit fazed by these stories. and we all, kind of shared our thoughts on this. And I think I was of the opinion that maybe we could offer them the joy of lesbians.
Oh my God!
That was at least, something. But I can remember Pam saying, every woman is entitled to an orgasm.
Cool.
Shall we start taking questions
Questions.
and discussion now? One question I'd like to ask, which you haven't really talked about, is why did it fold? And
Sorry, what was the
Why
question?
did it fold?
why did it fold?
Well,
And was it to do end?
Where's that letter?
it was funded. I mean, it costs 30-something thousand pounds a year to keep going, in terms of paying rent, paying the phone bills, and then we have paid workers, 85-ish. We got money from the GLC to pay for paid office workers, which obviously shifts any organisation. especially, and there are difficulties that follow from that.
Yeah.
In terms of everyone has been a volunteer and then someone's doing the same as you're doing, but they're being paid a proper wage. I mean, it was serious money, the GLC money. But we had 2 paid workers most of the time. So we needed then people to support the paid workers and so on. And then that money ended in
86. 31st of March 1986.
That was when the GLC ended, but then other
Money.
other
Well,
things
you had
picked up.
London Borough grants.
Oh, that's
Yes.
Because this is the letter that went out in 98,
Yes.
which says, you know, we've been providing phones, blah, blah. We've received a 20% cut in our funding from London Borough grants. And then, you know, keep the line open for 1 hour, costs £30. Keep it open for a 3-hour shift, blah, blah, blah. If we could get 100 women to donate a minimum of £10 by standing order, we'll be able to meet our immediate shortfall. Attached to
Obviously
the
we didn't.
donation form.
Yeah.
Okay, can I say something, because I was there at the time.
Okay.
All right.
That was
Good.
wrong. The collective had
Everyone
stopped
speak
being
up.
a collective. We certainly didn't meet every Monday, all of us who were on the line. We had, I think, we called ourselves a management committee, which was just some of the women. But to put it into context, yes, we were getting the grant up until 98, and we only had 1 paid worker then. But we actually had not many women on the line.
Yeah.
And you could say we had lost our way a bit, because I was the last active volunteer and I was going in once a week, maybe twice a week, trying to vary the days so that if you could only bring in a Wednesday, you might just get me. But one of the jobs of the worker then, because of what the collective had originally done, moved to what, you know, a lot of it moved to the worker, was supposed to coordinate the workers, the volunteers on the line, and that hadn't been happening for some time. The volunteers weren't there, they left, they weren't replaced. I came in 96, I think there was 1 lot of training I can remember after I was there, and you can't run a line on 1 woman only, and it wasn't so much, I mean, what you're saying about, you know, having 2 of you on at a time so you could have support. I didn't really feel the lack of that so much, but what I thought was, from the other way, I had no accountability to anybody. You know, I was writing up the calls in the book, no one else was reading it. You know, no one was in from me being in 1 week to the next. And when we got our 20% funding cut, the worker reduced her hours, but then within 3 months, as she was entitled to do, she decided she wanted to be made redundant. So she took redundant. So we still had 80% of the funding, and we could have carried on, but there wasn't the will of the management committee to do so. And in a sense, it's really hard to, you know, without, you know, needed dedicated women to actually be keeping it going, women who are going to come in and ask, you know, open the post and things, and it couldn't afford to just 1 person to do it on her own. So it was really sad, but it could have carried on without the lack of funding. But I know that that's what got round after we did stop, that it was the lack of funding. I remembered after we had stopped to ring the switchboard, because I didn't think anyone had officially told the switchboard that we had stopped. And he said, yes, whoever I spoke to, they thought lots of funding. I said, well, it wasn't actually. It was just that we just didn't have a structure. You know, we didn't have any way of keeping it going when there weren't the women who had to, you know, volunteer their time for it. And we didn't, and perhaps we could have tried doing it on, you know, found another worker to work, you know, even just 1 day a week to try and keep it ticking over. But we didn't, so it's awfully sad, you know, and the fact that we've been going for so long, and the fact, you know, that so, you know, voluntary groups could last with, you know, a lot less funding than what we actually had, because anyone could survive on a 20% cut, you know. But I couldn't tell you at what point the volunteers stopped coming in, you know, and we were still advertising exactly the same hours that when you were there, 2 to 10, Monday and Friday, and whatever time it was in the, you know, 6 to 10, the other 3 days of the week. And as far as I can remember, in the 3 years I was there, no one ever did the afternoon shift, you know.
No, I was there to the end, and I remember it got pretty I felt nervous on the night things if I was in it being there on my own, because you didn't know whether someone might put something through the door, and I just felt strange about it.
But see, I didn't feel any of that. It was the frustration of going to, because I was on the management committee, I was the treasurer, and to not have what we were doing, the purpose why we were there, never discussed. It supported the worker. The group felt they supported the worker. The worker was doing probably a lot of the publicity and outreach that you're talking about, talked about what was the role, but it just felt like,
Why?
what's the point? If you were lucky, you got me. I don't know when you stopped doing the line then, but as I said, it certainly was in the last few months, there was no one else but me. I could tell that.
I was told that they were kind of going to fold, and I was kind of cast adrift somehow, and I then thought, well, I'll go and volunteer with one of the gay lines because they need lesbians and so on, and I spoke to them and they interviewed, and I thought the things they asked me about S&M and trans business and all this, and I thought, this is not for me. They didn't like some of my answers and said, well, you're going to have to speak to guys who are into S&M and so on, and I said, I can't do this. I can't say certain things that I didn't want to say.
And there certainly was no transitional period which we sort of, I don't know, brought the gay men in to try and educate, train them up to say, like, from switchboard, right, this is, who believe in this gap. It was Jane Andrews, who has since died, and I who packed up what was said in, the collective minutes meetings, which probably everyone in this room who was there got mentioned at some point. We packed those up and all the information that we had and sent it up to Glasgow Women's archive, because there wasn't even, well, I suppose actually having offered to do it, probably no one else on the committee at the time was interested, but it was awfully, awfully sad. I don't think it needed to happen that way, and I don't know quite, looking back in hindsight, you think which is such a good thing, could there be more of a campaign to try and get it going rather than appeal for funding, appeal for other women to come forward and try and...
I think the context partly, to just jump back, was the difference in those 20 years. In the 70s, it was possible to stay unemployed for a very long time. So we were able to get volunteers. I used to, at one point, I was signing on every 2 months.
And you could live on the dole.
You could live on the dole, and so you weren't having to go in and prove what you'd done in every bloody day and all the rest of it. So there was surplus labour, as it were, that we could draw on to get volunteers together, not just for Lesbian Line, but for all. So that was when that was that surge of local activism, especially of setting stuff up, because there was the human resource there to do it, and it became, signing on and all those things became much more difficult. So there were far fewer women, and it sounds like it just went down a plug hole kind of.
And I think there's a different mindset as well, that an organisation couldn't survive without funding, or couldn't survive without a paid worker.
Yes, exactly. So that's the downside of getting the funding in the 80s, was that things collapsed when the funding got put
I know that, at the time when the GRC funding came out, there was a lot of talking amongst groups. I mean, I was on the London Women's Generation newsletter at the time, and we certainly didn't apply for money for a paid worker because we could see the pitfalls of that, when it obviously was more than one person working needed voluntary labour. I think we got money from a get set number sheet, on a practical level, side thing, rather than the workers. But I think it was more than just the funding. There was the fact that it needed a big, something needed to happen long before it finished, but it wasn't. It's very hard to be the one voice.
Impossible.
Yes, when other people are acting like, everything is fine. It's like living in a parallel universe.
About the timing, because Lynn, when were you there? And when
I came in the 90s. I ended up.
You were there at the same time as Carol.
Yeah, and I remember going on to the end. I had a full-time job, so I could only do evenings, and it became hard to get someone to be on with. They did ask me. Someone asked me at some stage to sign to be a director or something, and I said no, I can't do this because I don't. They said, we just need the signature because we need to, whatever.
Were you aware of each other?
You might have been there, but I mean, the only person who stands out was Pam, because she was a shining light all the time, as far as.
But I'd gone
in terms of years. You didn't know
but
each other.
you were.
But At what point, I'm trying to track, when did the decline start to happen? Because I'm very interested in the decline and why that energy was no longer there. I agree that the economic argument is one reason, but what was the point? Because you joined in '96, you were there all the way through.
I was there before that, yeah, just before.
But so, at what point does the energy start to get sucked out?
Well, before '98, before that letter was sent around in '98, I think it was, because then it was, you know, crisis point once the funding had been thing. The worker lasted 3 months, I think, after that, and then said you want to
But
go.
clearly there wasn't all that extraordinary energy there was at the beginning that we've
No,
been hearing about.
it was.
At some point in the 90s that disappeared. I'm just trying to work out when was the point.
I think
It's frustrating
96
to
was
that.
something.
I feel that way.
I was going to ask a different question. I was going to ask a different question, but I think as I'm listening to it, I'm seeing women's aid and other women's aid groups a very similar path, and I have an idea that it possibly wasn't exclusive enough. Radical feminists got squoze out at some point. You know, when you've got S&M feminists coming in, I think you can't manage, the dynamics are not going to be good.
We had one on the switchboard that I
Okay,
remember, and I found it very difficult to work
Yes,
with her.
I think a lot, you know, so there's a dynamic, and that was big in London at the time. Then
Yeah,
there's the
it was.
professionalisation that you avoided, that you ended up with paid work, and the resentment that comes in, and the non-collective working, and the management committees, and all the shit that goes with that. You're not activists anymore, really, are you? And then there's the service culture. You're trying to save all these women, and that takes up all the energy. Then you need funding, where rather than kickstarting society and other people do that stuff. There's something about that to me in that story, I think, that happened to women's aid and other
Yeah, because
things.
Spare Rib in the mid-90s collapsed, didn't it? That was, you know, that was all part of.
And at the same time, Lesbian Gay Switchboard got more funding, because I remember coming back to London from being away for a few years and thinking, my God, Lesbian Gay Switchboard, because that has their act together, and they had advertising everywhere. So they sort of became more shiny, glossy.
But they had lots of donations from gay
They
men.
had lots of. They had freehold. They had freehold. So.
But the issue wasn't the funding.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually put on record, the issue was not the loss of funding. It was not, you can't run a lesbian line, you know, say it's running over, I mean, you've only got one woman doing 4 hours a week on it. So a decline had happened before that letter was sent. All of the other women on the management committee had been on the line at some point, but there was no requirement on them to be doing both. Maybe if they had been required to both volunteer and be on, you know, on the line on the management committee, either actually the mice might have come sooner, or we might have had an active line longer, but it could still have carried on with 80, you know, because, you know, even if, I don't know what the funding figure was there, but even if it was 80% of 30,000, 24,000 could have
Kept it going.
kept it
But,
going.
but,
They could have paid all the bills, they could have paid all
Paid
But
the
I
rent
think it's
and the-
interesting what was being raised there about what happened in the 90s to lots of collectives.
Yes.
That's for me, because Lesbian Line was sort of part of the whole picture of, and what did go
Yeah, can
on?
I ask a question which is relevant to this? In a lot of women's groups, there was always the idea that women who came along, like with Rape Crisis or Women's Aid, they would become lesbians and feminists and part of the activism that was going on. Now, with everything you're saying, this later time span, you had Only Women Press, you had the Lesbian History Group was running then, you know, still, and you had all the activists in groups already. Now, the women who rang up, I don't know if you know, did any of them come along and start volunteering and
We
become
don't know.
lesbian feminist
I think
activists?
that's a whole PhD to be written to try and contact some of the women who contacted us and what happened to their lives, because we don't know, because they were anonymous. All we had was a name, and it wasn't necessarily their real name, but we only had a name to identify them in the logbook. So we have no idea.
You said early on you did have social meetings in your houses.
Yeah, but that was a small.
That was.
They would, you know, would be 6, 7, 8 women. Yeah.
Remember, we're talking about tens of thousands of phone calls
Yeah.
over that 20 odd years. And also, you know, hundreds of volunteers. But tens of thousands of women, and they weren't all regular, you know, lots of that would be one-off calls. I would love to be able to canvass for women's, thoughts
happened
about
to your life after the lesbian
did it work for them? Did we help them, or did we
make a difference?
Did we make
Yeah.
things worse?
Yeah.
So
Somebody's question down here?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Who's chairing?
nobody.
I'm sharing, but,
Sorry.
you can take the questions, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Really great presentation. I don't know, maybe this just gives a bit of sort of another experience to it, because I lived in Cambridge in the 90s and I was on the Cambridge line, which was a really long-standing one as well. I think it was, I don't know, my memory was well, I would have sort of been around at that time, but I think it was started maybe even, it was really early, anyway, it was definitely in the 70s and it started like...
I think it
Yes,
started
it wasn't
after
up-
ours.
yeah, it would have,
Yeah.
yeah, but it was around that time, it was definitely...
Because a lot of ones in different towns started after we
Oh,
got going,
Yeah.
seeing the need for things
Yeah,
out of
sure.
London.
Yeah.
And we had all your groups numbers, so we could say where you're living. Oh, there's one in Cambridge.
Exactly, and we get into that. But just like in terms of all the sort of like the decline of it, so I'd already moved away by then, but I think the Cambridge one went on actually into the 2000s, and then basically, as I recall, it kind of stopped just because it wasn't really being used anymore, and there'd be a lot of sort of very, very quiet shifts. And so there had been more of an infrastructure kind of being set up, because there was, I don't know if anyone knows, there was this group called Sister Act, that kind of like social group, but there'd be lots of different things under Sister Act, like a book group and a walking group and a sports group, and all these different things, and they started to do like discussions, all the things that had been done by the line. So I think it was felt that, there was still will to put it on if it was necessary, if it was needed, but it just wasn't really being used. So I think it was maybe that shift, but it certainly, I think, became very kind of depoliticised as well. And when I think of the woman who started the Cambridge, well, certainly one who was right there, it used to be in her home, like in the sort of late 70s, and then one of the women who was absolutely the backbone of this Sister Act, they've now basically totally gone along with the whole trans thing. And so there is still this infrastructure in Cambridge in terms of Sister Act and with different groups, but it's all kind of, they're just basically, working alongside men in dresses. And so, but it's kind of like a bit of a different experience maybe to what I think.
There is clause 28 as well, which came,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think when that came in, so that people got all
88.
scared about criminality.
1988.
And there's a question at the back as well.
A couple of things. I think that's really interesting, and others have been talking about the fact that there was a fall off in the amount of need, because the women simply weren't first rolling in. So it may be that by this time in the 90s, there were so many things going on for lesbians, and there was a different world for lesbians, so in a sense they didn't need it. I would suggest they desperately need it now.
Yes.
Reading online about young lesbians,
Yes.
we're desperate to meet actual lesbians.
Yeah.
We're in a whole different position. But the other thing I wanted to say was that the issue about paid workers and what that does to a collective is absolutely crucial, because of course I was involved in the Lesbian Archive, which collapsed in 88, 89. Once you have paid workers, they know everything that's going on. The rest of the collective doesn't, and the rest of the collective no longer does the work.
And you
the
abdicate to the
volunteering
worker.
starts to disappear.
Yeah.
It creates a totally different structure, and it fundamentally erodes the
Absolutely.
possibility of a feminist group. Now, I don't know whether this happens with, it seems with Lesbian Line. I don't know whether it happens with Women's Aid, whether there are still volunteers and they carry on even though there are workers who are doing everything. But the professionalisation is hugely,
Yes.
hugely important. I don't even know you can have a movement with that professionalisation going on. Everything died. Everything died.
But we couldn't have done what we did without funding.
It's a
That's the
workers-
thing. Anyway,
it's-
question at the
funding,
yeah,
question, not
I
workers.
think the liberalism of the 90s arising from increased pornification and the fact that things were coming to the fore, like ministers and judges being named in huge child abuse scandals across the country. And I think and what they didn't want was to fund a load of women's organisations who would constantly raise that as an issue. So I believe they allowed parts of the movement to be mainstreamed in. The liberalism took care of, we're all gay and we're proud of it. Yeah, and I think that's what's happened. Everything became professionalised, as Sheila says. And it was as a result of pornification.
I agree with Sheila. I worked in the GLC Women's Unit, and I recommended to some groups not to get funding, because I'm talking about feminist groups. If you're doing childcare, or my criteria was, if you're doing something the state should be providing, then let the state provide. In other words, GLC should spend the money. But if you're trying to do something political, you can't do something political if you're getting state funding. They won't let you. That was then. That was even Ken Livingstone's law.
Well, the Girls' Project, I have to speak up for.
Well,
They were again, though that was
But
only
that's-
because there were a number of lesbians employed in them. I think that
But
was the reason.
if the state should be providing things for young people, then by all means do it. But if there's something you want to do that's radical, then why would you expect that if they give you money, that they won't restrict what you can do? That was my point.
Yeah.
We're paying our bloody taxes and all the rest of it, and we want services, we're entitled to ask for those services, but I don't think the political stuff should be funded, because the person who pays the money determines what you can and cannot do.
But should the state be providing advice to people in distress because they want to become lesbian?
No, it wouldn't.
Should. I'm saying should.
No,
Should that be something we expect of the state?
My difficulty is, if they did, they would start telling you who can or cannot, including men who call themselves lesbians. Yes, but that would have been the case then.
No,
Well,
there was a little bit of time where young lesbian groups thrived in Ilia. A little bit of time for a few years until they've said.
That is the point.
Once local authorities took over the funding from the GLC, there was a 2 to 3 year tapering period where they didn't just want to fund all these groups. So
And
they had to find criteria to reduce.
Yeah, they did start wanting
And the main
outcomes,
criteria
which
was,
Yes,
it
exactly.
would be provided in the mainstream by social services, so they would filter those off. The ones that were no good were just, had the grant taken away.
Is the real issue today, what do we need to do today?
Yeah, that was
In our circumstances today, because it seems to me that we've got to find a way of providing support, not for men. That we as lesbians need to be doing things that provide space. We can't even bloody meet today.
Yeah.
We can meet in this room.
Between the trans groups, because the trans groups get government funding to go in and talk about gender, so we should say every time you say gender, you need to talk about lesbian and gay.
Yeah.
Every pound you spend on gender in schools, you need to talk about lesbian and gay kids, and not freak out and say no.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
That would be biological sex, but if we started introducing the concept of parity in funding, maybe we would get somewhere.
Possibly.
Well, it's whether it's desirable or not, though, isn't it? Val, you wanted to say
I
something.
just wanted to say that part of the older lesbian network, when they got initial funding, but the first year, after the first year, we said, no, we don't want funding, we don't want to be told what to do. So
and you're still meeting, aren't
we're
you?
still meeting.
The New York Lesbian Archive never took funding from the state ever. It did get private donations. It's still there and it's incredibly strong. So there are other ways to survive.
And
That's America.
What?
There's more money there.
Yes, let's speak.
I'm interested also in finding space and whether it was much more easier to find a space, because you were talking about where you were,
Actual
Grayson
buildings,
Road,
yeah, probably.
and in Featherstone Street, wherever it is, and I'm like, well, we managed to get this place, but my impression is now that it's really, really hard to get space now.
Well, because all those centres that have existed for years are now becoming luxury flats.
Yeah.
Because the councils are desperate. So everything in Haringey has gone. It's just, so it's.
It's 10 to 4. We've got 10 minutes, and one of the questions that we wanted to ask, you may have other ones, but we wanted to say, is there a need for this, for a lesbian line kind of thing now? And Sheila said yes. And if so, is it the same animal or is it something different or what?
Particularly, can we ask younger women here what they're thinking about this?
Yes, that's a good idea, Sheila.
It's a very
Take the floor.
different environment now. I mean, you can't even say the word lesbian without, it just being assumed. It's not even, it's just assumed that, trans women are involved in that space. So, and if you, deviate from that narrative, you're considered a bigot or a Nazi. So it's really it's come to the point where we are now just on the defensive, like using the word lesbian has become so taboo in one sense, but also just it has completely deviated from its original definition. So it's very hard. How can you build on something when that word has been compromised from that point? It's
maybe when it comes to doing all the bloody work day after day after day, it would end up being just bloody lesbians doing it, because the rest would just,
But you need a consensus amongst lesbians, and when you've got other lesbians who are absolutely rolling out the red carpet, that's when you can't live.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's still a need for women, especially young women, needing a listening ear and having all sorts of questions. But I think some aspect which in the olden days when people rang up and said, what lesbian bars are there, or when is such and such a pub is open, is sort of superseded by the internet.
Does it. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think there's still the need for a lot of young women, because the number of women my age and younger, I find it quite, I know why it is, but who sort of come out really late in life because they've never even considered lesbianism, or they thought I might be a lesbian, but that they don't even know who to speak to or where to go, and it's useful if, that's my feeling. I mean, I'm not that young, but...
Yeah, lesbian are invisible again, isn't it?
Tracy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think that with the service, you'll never have anything quite like that again, but you probably need to think about buying space that is women's, having gatherings, private things. That is the only strategy at the moment, and then continue to kind of argue against it. But it's time to go back and.
But who can you ring up when you're heartbroken, when your girlfriend's just left you, and you just want to talk it through? That's
Maybe I'm thinking of
that's still
Well, Emily,
Emily, yeah.
Yeah, well, I do think that it's still important that there's a sort of publicly known, place that people can ring up, because I remember in my late teens, I was desperate to speak to another lesbian. I hadn't met another lesbian, and I was so desperate to talk about things that I was dealing with other women, with all the pressures surrounding me. And I rang up the gay and lesbian switchboard, and I asked, is there a lesbian that I can talk to? I really want to speak to a lesbian. But whenever I phoned up, it was all men.
Yeah.
And when I was like, oh, is there some way that I can find other lesbians? And he just said, oh, well, there's a website online. And that was pretty much it, And when I wanted to ask specifically, because obviously the homophobia and prejudice aimed towards women is going to be a lot different to that's aimed at men, just because of the dynamic of the differences in sex, right, and how misogyny works. And so I couldn't actually really articulate what I was thinking and try to find a support mechanism, because their heart was in the right place, but they were gay men, they didn't know anything. And so I grew up not knowing any other lesbians at all, and I really just wanted another lesbian to talk to, and I think that's still needed now. Especially because, LGBT youth spaces now are kind of erasing lesbianism-ish.
erasing the concept of woman and that.
And because of this sort of because it's now forbidden to talk about certain things, it means that lesbians can't actually get their head around stuff and get their head around what they're feeling. And so having a dedicated lesbian space that actually clearly defines, no, we're going to have only lesbians on this, we're going to speak specifically for lesbians, I think is important. There's going to be some trouble in that. I'm guessing there'd actually be a lot more harassment now if you tried to set up a lesbian line. And you'd have to think of some way
to configure security. So, you know, the people working on the line were more secure, and it wasn't, you know, because it's now easier to find out like where things are physically located through things like phone lines and the internet and things like that. But I do think things like that are still needed.
Can we call ourselves lesbian feminists?
Leanne, you want to say something? Can we just...
Yeah, I would like to say that I think it's very, very much needed, a lesbian line, something like that, especially for younger women and for teenage girls who are going to be pressured to transition, that there's no other option for them than to become trans and not a lesbian. So
I was going, you will, I suppose, assume, because I'm not going to Feminism in London, bring this up, hopefully question, and find out what...
The question about what
happens now.
What do you feel from, because you'll have a hopefully much bigger audience. And the other thing is that possibly, just a suggestion, if there are women, lesbians who are interested, say, in getting involved or even coming to this group, Lesbian History Group, that they can give you email addresses and so on. So they're vetted and we get the email address.
How do you vet them?
So we could pick up a
Yes, okay.
I just want to suggest the term lesbian feminist seems to be fairly... I've re-engaged the debate, as it were, and...
autograph.
And they don't like the word feminist, which is a very, very good read. I do. They being the men who were women. I mean, the men...
That's not true. They use the word feminist.
Well, they don't seem to be... Well, maybe then another name, as lesbians, in which we do assert, because I can't find anything for lesbians. Everything I look at, when I live in Norfolk, everything is
LGBT.
Is LGBT.
And
then it becomes a man, somebody who is wearing a bloody dress, telling me what, and I'm not having it. I'm just not having it. And I'm making a parallel between race, because there's only one race, the human race. But actually, lots of people wouldn't say, lots of white people wouldn't say they're black. Now, as a black woman, why is it okay to say that I can't be a woman, and that being something specific? So I think that we all should be, if we can, countering the trans stuff and doing something positive for ourselves. I don't just want to be against. I remember, and I think we're all trying to celebrate how wonderful it is to be a lesbian. It's a good thing, and we can't even talk about it now. So we've got to find a way, I'm not saying lesbian feminist might not be the right one, but some way in which we reflect who we are and the women who call, who want to call, who want support. We are women, and there's nothing wrong with being biologically a woman. And changing, just having your balls cut off does not make you a woman, not in my experience. So I'm going to be saying that.
What's your experience, Tanny?
I haven't. I have got children, grandchildren. I have got a grandson. It does matter to me that he and they are allowed to be who they wish to be. But I refuse to be allowed to be a woman.
I know.
And that's what I'm suggesting, that we do something about it. I'm writing about it, and I'm going to have. I had a meeting. I'm going to go to another meeting today in Leeds amongst some black lesbian activists, and I think that we might manage to be reasonably successful.
I think the tide is turning.
Yes.
It's all coming out in the open press, and
even the straight women are coming out feminists on the Norwegian Facebook
and
thing.
Mumsnet. Anybody looked at Mumsnet?
Yeah.
Lots of stuff there.
Mumsnet. That's where we can find lesbians.
Okay, last point then.
No, I can talk to Linda later.
Who else had their hand up? Somebody else?
Yeah, it's a little bit beside the point, but I go on YouTube quite a lot. And I used to Google detransition or whatever. And there are many more people who now have YouTube channels, have the transition.
Oh, excellent.
I'm just saying.
And that poor bloke who wanted to do that research.
Let's chat, so I was going to say something about YouTube actually, because I think given the obvious difficulties of trying to do anything at the moment in terms of getting space and set up or whatever, I think it would be really good to have like YouTube, because I've heard this so many times now, like from younger women and all different kinds of things about like that they don't have access to lesbian stories, older lesbians. I think it would be really good to have. I mean, I know this. I presume this is being recorded, is it? So I know this is a Lesbian History Group website. But what about just having some things like interviews, informal chats, little short things, reminiscing of, some of this kind of stuff, I think would be really, really good, and it would help to develop a lesbian consciousness in young women that might make them more inclined, because at the moment actually lots of young lesbians wouldn't bring up a use of it like that. So I think that would be really good to have like a film project, a bit like Magdalene Burns, but something that is more about lesbian experience, women who came out much later in life or younger. I think that would be really good.
Almost like Lesbiana, but
but more like, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely great.
Okay. Can I just, are we going to talk about the next meeting or at all? Are we going to say
we should
anything about
say something.
Yeah. Can we just say that the next meeting is going to be a celebration of Kate Millett, because she died recently and is a very significant lesbian feminist.
Absolutely.
And so,
more about her book, Sexual Politics.
Well, Sexual Politics and her lesbian novels, I think it's got to be.
Her novels are brilliant.
So could women be thinking about what
They
that
made
book
me who I
meant to
am.
them and things that they might like to contribute for the next session? I think that, so that we can all sort of be joining together, saying things about that book. If you haven't read it, please read it by the next time. I'm sure everybody has, but you have homework.
It's too difficult.
The other thing is, if there are women who came in late, can you make sure that you've paid your £5 contribution or less than that if you can only afford less than that, to Elaine? That's very important. Get your name on the list. Also make sure that your email address is with Elaine, so that you can be on the Lesbian History Group. Let's call it the Lesbian History Group community. So you can be in the Lesbian History Group community.
Yeah. Helen's got something to say. Helen, before we break.
You sit down for now. Can I just invite you all, please, if you possibly can, to come to, we're going to do this at Philia, the Feminists in London event, next weekend. It's at 3:00 on Sunday. I'm not sure what room it will be, but it'd be really nice if any of you who've been at this session could come and support us, because we're a bit anxious about
the conference is
the
women.
Feminists in London conference next weekend.
No, you can get concessions.
There's concessions.
Can we thank you? Can we thank you?
We've done a bit here. This was.
Oh yes.
An announcement, a women's only nightclub thing next Saturday. Here are the leaflets in Hackney.
And if anybody wants the Trouble and Strife article about lesbian,
This was an article.
Also, tables back in the middle, please. Chairs stacked at the end. Don't go without stacking your chair. We have no stickers back. Then everyone's to
send it a different day if you can have one.
It's not fair that at the end of these meetings, a few people are left always to move everything. So before you carry on talking, please, can you stack your chairs?
Would you like one of these?
Back, tables in the
It's
middle,
an article
chairs
from
around the
Catherine
tables,
Strike from
please.
1992. It's all
Take
about
our stickers
lesbian
back,
rights.
take our hands out.
Is some on the table?
Is it?
No, there was a lot. There was about 10 sheets of these. Oh, they're coming back. Yeah. Right.
Is it possible to
Scan.
to put, when we put your recording on our website, is it possible to have one,
I'm going to scan a lot of stuff.
And at the back?
Do you want to Catherine Strike, or you can look it up? Oh, you've got it.
I'll take another one now.
No, see if everybody else likes
But yeah, I'm going to scan a lot of stuff so we can do a slide there.
Okay.
I think I just.
Can I have one of those handouts?
Yeah.
Oh, they're going round? Oh, she's got one over there. Yeah.
I'll be back.
Skiving off.
I'm on a holiday.
I'm going away on Wednesday now. I'm going to be missing the big Julie Bindle's big thing, but I just decided I've got to get away because I haven't had a holiday since last Easter. I'm not blaming you if you don't have holiday.
I was just saying, no, please, that's why I said you don't have the GLF thing on that. And I do enjoy coming to
We got quite a few. Frankie volunteered, so she might come up to do the GLF.
It'd be worth coming just to see Frankie again.
Yeah. So she said she got lots of memories of it, but she was so angry about what was happening now. I said, well, she's writing about it.
I said, was it Elaine or you that said, oh, and then that's where I was in it for the shortest possible time because I went in and I got a bunch of sexist shit and came out and then joined radical feminists and we decided let's go and get all these women fed up with now into the women's
I'm just going to go to the loo. Oh, hi, Lynn.
I thought you might be
I was originally going to go to it, and then do you know what? So much was going on. I just thought, oh, I can't. I thought of sorting out tickets and all of that. I did. Did you not? I sent you a text. I've started on it, and I'll finish it tomorrow. Yeah. So I'm doing a bit of proofreading as well, and just sort of formatting. Is that all right? I thought just to get it all.
Yeah, great.
So we thought insignificant, we'll do that thing. And there was and then we discovered on the very last day that the town beach was absolutely brilliant.
Is this Cadiz?
Yeah.
Really? I saw a food programme on Cadiz by that Fishman, and I thought it looked really nice. The Spanish it's got a fish restaurant.
It's got a town beach that all the town beaches not really do. And there's big circles of old women and they play games, little games, and they dip. And the men sit up another end and they do something else. And Anna just popped into the water. And it's still as
So it's like it hasn't been invaded by tourists.
Hardly at all. There were cruise ships coming down. There were two there while we were there, and they didn't use that beach. And they went further along where there's loads of beaches outside the old town. But the old town beach, with all these elderly
at lesbians having a little wheel. I loved it.
Well, Rosemary's in Valencia.
Oh, is she?
Probably not having such a such an
Can
untouristy
I
time.
leave that to you just in case I might get guessed?
Sorry.
That's the...
This is it?
Yeah, that's it. It is heavy.
I'll have to carry it under an arm.
Yeah. That might forget it.
I'm going to have to get it back. We haven't talked about catering it yet, but I think we need some projections and pictures of her at least.
Yeah. Did you get my email about naturopath?
No.
Oh,
After the last walk we were both on. Or recently?
No, recently, about a week or so ago. Because I just thought, maybe you thought you'd see me, so you didn't.
No, I don't think I got it. You probably put the address in wrong. Did it bounce back?
No, it didn't. Because your address just comes up in my address book. Are you about to rush off now? You're going to the pub?
No, I'm not going to go to the pub.
No.
Last one I've got from you is June. No, sorry, can't do that Sunday.
God, it just never got there then. Anyway, it's just... I should have my thyroid sat, nuclear medicine, and that will make the absolute opposite, and I'll have to take thyroid drugs for the rest of my life. And the only thing I can find on the internet as an alternative is naturotherapy. So, is it called naturopathy? Natural, whatever it's called anyway. And I just wondered if you actually write down there's loads in London.
There's a therapy approach to it.
Is there?
And I did do a course because I specifically wanted a course on the endocrine system. So I'll see if I've got some names on that. No, I'm not an expert. I tried to, get what I could. But there was a woman there. Most people have hypothyroid. So there's a woman there who was hijacking the whole discussion because it was her thing. See whether I've got good notes of it, and maybe that will start you on the right we'll be wasting away to nothing before we know it. I think we're also late and thinking
Well, that's what, and my GP told me that if I didn't do this, I have got, I take my own blood pressure, my blood pressure is not high. My GP told us if I didn't do what they're suggesting, I'd have heart disease and just die of a heart attack any other time.
Well, it does overwork your heart because it hangs for you know metabolism. So you've got to deal with it somehow.
Yeah, I know. So what is it further? I like it.
I'll send you an email so you have my right maybe my older one. Some people still have it, and apparently someone came to me as a new patient and said that she got me on Google and they haven't wanted to.
Look at it, because you just come up with it.
Yeah, well, sometimes it comes up with alternatives. You just have either search the New River or Yeah. It's good. I've been meaning to get yeah, but I feel a bit sort of lost.
I was looking for it. Did you switch it off?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope so, yeah.
Who knows?
I switched the recording off. So much for